Before we go any further, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel, and trust me, you are going to want to stay until the very end of this one, because what happens in the last 10 minutes of this story changed everything I thought I knew about courage, love, and what it truly means to see someone. Now let me ask you something before I begin. Have you ever watched someone ask for help, not with words, not with a voice, but with their hands, with their eyes, with the desperate trembling of fingers that were signing something so fast, so urgent, that you had no idea what they were saying, but you knew, deep in your bones, that something was terribly wrong? That is exactly what happened to Marcus Cole on a cold Tuesday morning in November, standing in the parking lot of a grocery store in Millhaven, Pennsylvania. And what he saw, what that little girl's hands were desperately trying to tell him, would set off a chain of events so unexpected, so emotionally shattering, and ultimately so breathtaking, that the entire town would never be the same. Marcus was 36 years old, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and tired eyes that still held warmth somewhere deep inside them. He was a single father, had been for 4 years, ever since his wife Renata passed away from a sudden cardiac event at 31, leaving him alone with their son, 7-year-old Eli, a quiet boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Marcus worked as an electrician, running his own small business out of a second-hand van with a magnetic sign on the door that read Cole Electric. No job too small. He wasn't rich. He wasn't flashy. He was just a man trying to hold his world together with both hands while grief chewed quietly at the edges of everything. That Tuesday morning, Marcus had stopped at Millhaven Grocery for milk, bread, and Eli's favorite cereal, the kind with the cartoon bear on the box. Eli was in school, and Marcus had exactly 40 minutes before his first job of the day, rewiring a basement on the east side of town. He was loading bags into the back of his van when he heard something that wasn't quite a sound. More like a presence. A disruption in the air beside him. He turned. Standing 3 feet away was a girl. She looked about 9 or 10 years old, small for her age, with dark brown hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, as though she had done them herself in a hurry. She wore a thin purple jacket that was clearly too light for November, jeans with a fraying hem, and sneakers with a broken left buckle. Her face was pale, and her dark brown eyes were enormous, wide with something that Marcus immediately recognized as fear. Real fear. Not the kind a child wears when they've lost their mom in a store. Something older and heavier than that. She was signing. Her hands moved rapidly, fingers flying through shapes and gestures that Marcus did not understand. He had never learned American Sign Language. He knew nothing beyond the occasional letter. But the girl's expression, the way her eyes kept darting over her shoulder toward the far end of the parking lot, told him everything her hands could not. She was asking for help. And someone was following her. Marcus held up both his hands gently, palms out, the universal signal of I mean no harm. He shook his head slowly and mouthed the words. I don't understand. I'm sorry. The girl's face crumpled. Not into tears, she was clearly too practiced at holding herself together for that, but into something worse. Resignation. The particular devastation of a child who has learned that the world does not understand her, and has largely stopped being surprised by that fact. She started to turn away. Wait, Marcus said aloud, then caught himself. She couldn't hear him. He stepped forward carefully and touched the edge of her sleeve, the lightest possible touch, barely a graze, and when she turned back, he pointed to himself, then to her, then pressed his hands together in the universal gesture of please. Something shifted in her face. She studied him for a long moment with those enormous dark eyes, calculating in the way that only children who have learned not to trust adults can calculate. Then she reached into the pocket of her thin purple jacket and pulled out a small, battered notebook and a stubby pencil. She wrote 4 words and held the notebook up to his face. He won't stop following me. Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He looked up immediately, scanning the parking lot. At the far end, near the entrance to the store, stood a man. Mid-40s, heavy-set, wearing a dark gray jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, watching them, with the particular stillness of someone who was pretending not to be watching. Marcus looked back at the girl. She was gripping the notebook so hard her knuckles were white. He made a decision in less than 3 seconds, the kind of decision that a parent makes not with logic but with every protective instinct firing at once. He pointed to the passenger door of his van, then placed his hand on his chest, then shook his head firmly side to side, trying to communicate, "You are not going anywhere without me right now." The girl looked at the van. She looked at him. She looked back at the man in the gray jacket, who had taken 2 slow steps in their direction. She climbed into the van. Marcus locked the doors, pulled out his phone, and dialed 911 before he had even started the engine. The dispatcher's voice came on and Marcus spoke quickly, clearly, giving the lot location, the description of the man in gray, and a single sentence that he would repeat many times in the days ahead. "I have a little girl here who says she's being followed. She's deaf. She can't speak. She's scared. Please send someone now." He kept his eyes on the man in the gray jacket the whole time. The man looked at the van for one long, calculating moment. Then he turned and walked away, unhurried, around the corner of the building and out of sight. Marcus exhaled. He turned to look at the girl in his passenger seat. She had pulled her knees up to her chest, arms wrapped around them, watching him with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and desperate, fragile hope. The notebook was still in her hand. She opened it to a new page and wrote something, then turned it to face him. "My name is Wren. I don't know where my foster mom is. I've been walking since last night." Marcus read those words twice. Then he read them a third time. Since last night. This child, this small, cold, frightened child in a jacket too thin for November, had been walking, alone, through a Pennsylvania night, and she was deaf, and somehow she had survived until this parking lot, and somehow she had found him. Or maybe, Marcus thought later, she had found him the way these things always happen. Not by accident. Not by coincidence. But because the universe sometimes decides that 2 broken things belong together, and it arranges the collision with a precision that only looks like chance from the outside. He wrote in the notebook, slowly and clearly, "My name is Marcus. I am going to help you. You are safe now." Wren read his words. She read them again. Her chin trembled, just once, quickly controlled, and then she nodded. Outside the van, police sirens were already rising in the distance, coming closer. But inside the van, in the warmth and quiet, something had already begun. Something small and fragile and impossibly important, the way all real things begin. Marcus Cole had no idea, in that moment, that his life had just changed direction completely. He didn't know about the investigation that was coming, the courtroom, the social workers, the sleepless nights, or the moment 6 months from now that would bring him to his knees in the best possible way. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty as he sat in that parking lot waiting for the police to arrive, glancing at the thin, brave, exhausted girl sitting beside him. He was not going to let anything else happen to her. Not on his watch. Not ever. The police arrived within 4 minutes. 2 cruisers and a social services vehicle that pulled up with an urgency that told Marcus this situation was being taken seriously from the very first second. Officer Dana Reyes, a compact woman in her 30s with close-cropped natural hair and a manner that was simultaneously efficient and deeply kind, took control of the scene immediately. She crouched down outside the passenger window and signed to Wren. Real sign language, fluid and practiced. Wren's whole body seemed to exhale with relief at being understood, and her hands began to move quickly, telling her story. Marcus watched from the driver's side, translating nothing but absorbing everything. The way Wren's face moved through expressions as she signed, fear, frustration, exhaustion, and underneath all of it, something that looked heartbreakingly like shame, the particular shame of a child who has been taught, through accumulated experience, that her existence is an inconvenience. Officer Reyes translated as Wren signed, keeping her voice low and steady. "Her name is Wren Calloway. She's 10 years old. She has been in the foster care system for 3 years, since she was 7. Her current placement is with a woman named Dorothy Marsh in Ridgecroft. That's about 11 miles northeast of here. She says she ran from the placement last night because… Reyes paused, listening, watching Wren's hands carefully. Because a man she did not recognize came to the house, and she says she saw him and Dorothy exchange something, like an envelope. And then Dorothy told Wren to go pack her things, that she was being moved. But when Wren asked where, Dorothy wouldn't tell her and told her to be quiet. Reyes's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Wren says she's been moved 4 times in 3 years. Always suddenly. Always at night. She says she got scared and ran. Marcus said nothing. His hands were gripped on the steering wheel though the engine was off. The man in the parking lot. Reyes continued, watching Wren sign. She first noticed him about 2 hours ago. He's been behind her since the Maple Street Bridge. She doesn't know him, but she says he had the same. Reyes paused again. She says he had the same way of looking at her as the man at Dorothy's house. Like she was something to be collected. The air in the car felt very cold. Wren turned her head and looked at Marcus then, directly, as though checking whether he was still there. He held her gaze and nodded slowly. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Something in her expression shifted, just a degree, but Marcus felt it. The next 3 hours moved fast. Wren was taken to Millhaven's Child Advocacy Center, a calm and carefully designed space meant to feel nothing like a police station. Marcus was questioned separately, gave his full account, and was told he could leave. He did not leave. He sat in the waiting room with a cup of terrible coffee and his van keys in his hand for 2.5 hours, because something in him could not walk out that door until he knew she was okay. The detective assigned to Wren's case was a heavy-set man named Gerald Faust, who had the kind of face that looked permanently exhausted but whose eyes were sharp and alert. He came to find Marcus in the waiting room around noon. You the one who found her? Faust asked. I didn't find her, Marcus said carefully. She found me. Faust studied him. We've been trying to reach her foster placement. Dorothy Marsh's phone goes to voicemail. We sent a unit to the house in Ridgecroft. He paused. The house is empty. Cleared out. Like she was never there. The cold feeling returned to Marcus's chest. What does that mean for Wren? He asked. Means she goes into emergency placement tonight while we sort this out. Faust said it flatly, the way people say things they have had to say too many times. There's a facility 20 minutes from here. She'll be safe. She's been safe 4 times in 3 years, Marcus said quietly. And every time, something happened. Faust gave him a long look. You got something you want to say, Mr. Cole? I want to say she deserves better than another placement she knows nothing about. Marcus heard himself speaking and wasn't entirely sure where the words were coming from. She's 10 years old and deaf and she walked 11 miles through the night because she was scared, and she was right to be scared. And now we're going to put her somewhere new and tell her it's fine. Faust was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You have any experience with deaf children, Mr. Cole? No. You know ASL? No. You're a single father with a 7-year-old son and a full-time job? Yes. And you're sitting here telling me what exactly? Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back up at Faust. I'm telling you that she looked at me in that parking lot and trusted me when she had every reason not to trust anyone. And I don't know what that means yet. But I know I can't just walk out of here and pretend it didn't happen. Faust studied him with those sharp, tired eyes for a long moment. Then he pulled out a business card and set it on the coffee table between them. The emergency placement won't be available until 6. Nothing happens until then. He stood. Go get some lunch, Mr. Cole. Be back by 5 if you feel strongly about this. Marcus picked up the card. He called his brother James from the parking lot. James was 40, a high school history teacher, steady and thoughtful, the kind of man who listened before he spoke. Marcus told him everything in 8 minutes flat. When he finished, James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So what are you going to do?" "I have no idea," Marcus said honestly. "Yes, you do," James said. "You called me, which means you already decided and you want someone to tell you it's not crazy." Marcus pressed his hand over his eyes. "Is it crazy?" "Absolutely," James said. "Also, I think you should do it." Marcus went home, picked up Eli from school, made grilled cheese sandwiches, and sat at the kitchen table watching his son draw elaborate pictures of rocket ships while something enormous and quiet rearranged itself in his chest. "Dad," Eli said without looking up from his drawing, "you have your thinking face on." "Do I? You get a line right here." Eli pointed between his own eyebrows. "You only get it when something big happened." Marcus looked at his son, this serious, gentle 7-year-old with Renata's eyes, and felt the familiar ache of love and loss braided together so tightly they were indistinguishable from each other. "Something big did happen today," he said. "I met someone who needs help." Eli looked up. "What kind of help?" "The kind that takes a while. The kind that changes things." Eli considered this with the gravity of a child who understands more than adults expect. "Is she nice?" Marcus blinked. "What made you think it was a she?" Eli shrugged and went back to his rocket ship. "Your voice sounds different when it's about a girl. It sounds like when you talk about Mom." At 5 o'clock, Marcus Cole walked back into the Child Advocacy Center in Millhaven, Pennsylvania, and told Detective Faust that he would like to apply for emergency foster placement for a 10-year-old deaf girl named Wren Calloway. He did not know what was coming. He didn't know about the background check, the home study, the mandatory ASL classes, or the court dates. He didn't know about the nights Wren would wake from nightmares signing words he couldn't yet read. He didn't know about the man in the gray jacket, who had a name and a history and connections that went far deeper and far darker than anyone in that parking lot had imagined. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Dorothy Marsh had not simply disappeared. She had been found. 3 hours ago, in the parking garage of a mall in Pittsburgh, 60 miles away, unconscious in the back of her own car. And clutched in her hand was a piece of paper with a single name written on it. Wren's name. Emergency foster placement moved faster than Marcus had expected, partly because Wren had been flagged as a high-priority case given the circumstances of her discovery, and partly because Marcus's background check came back clean within 24 hours, and partly, Marcus suspected, because Wren herself had been asked if she was comfortable with the arrangement, and had answered in the way that apparently surprised every adult in the room. She had signed yes immediately, without hesitation, before the question was even fully finished. The social worker assigned to the case was a tall, deliberate woman named Sylvia Park, late 40s, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had a manner of looking at people that suggested she was quietly compiling comprehensive psychological profiles in real time. She arrived at Marcus's house on Chestnut Street the following afternoon to conduct the preliminary home evaluation. The house was small, 3 bedrooms, a yard that needed work, a kitchen where the cabinets didn't quite match, but it was warm and orderly and clearly a place where a child was loved. Eli's drawings covered the refrigerator. There were books on every surface. The second spare bedroom, the one Marcus had been using as storage, had been cleared out in a single frantic evening and contained a new bed, a lamp, and a small desk that Marcus had picked up from a second-hand store on his lunch break. On the desk, Marcus had placed a brand new notebook and a set of colored pencils. Sylvia looked at the desk for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. "You work fast," she said. "I had the night free," he said. She made a note on her clipboard and moved on. Wren arrived the following morning, a Friday, brought by Sylvia and a child welfare officer named Torres. She stood on the front step with a backpack that was too light, barely anything in it, Marcus realized, because she barely had anything, and looked at the house with the careful, assessing expression of a child who had learned not to trust first impressions of places that were supposed to be safe. Eli was standing in the hallway behind Marcus, pressed against the wall with his hands clasped behind his back, trying very hard to look casual and succeeding not at all. Wren stepped inside. She looked around the hallway, the family photos, Eli's drawings, the coat rack overloaded with jackets. Then she looked at Eli. Eli raised one hand. He had been practicing. Slowly, carefully, with the intense concentration of a 7-year-old attempting something important, he signed, "Hi. I'm Eli. I like rockets." It was the only phrase he had learned in the 48 hours since his father had told him about Wren. Wren stared at him. Something happened in her face, a crack in the careful composure, quick as a blink. Then she signed back, one corner of her mouth lifting fractionally, "I like rockets too." Marcus, who had stayed up until 1 in the morning watching ASL tutorial videos on his phone, caught approximately 1 word in 3 of what she said. But he caught enough. And Eli, who had understood nothing, somehow understood everything, and grinned so wide it changed the whole room. The first week was careful. Quiet. Full of misunderstandings that required notebooks and patient rewriting and occasional frustrated tears. Mostly, though Marcus would never admit it, from Marcus himself, sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night with his phone propped against the salt shaker, practicing signs with the focused desperation of a man who has decided that failure is not an option. Wren watched him practice one evening from the kitchen doorway, still and unnoticed. When he finally looked up and saw her, he expected, he wasn't sure what. Amusement, maybe? Or that careful blankness she wore so often. Instead, she walked to the table, sat across from him, and for the next hour, she taught him. Slowly. Patiently. Correcting his hand shapes with gentle repositions of his fingers, her expression somewhere between exasperated and quietly delighted. She had the focused, serious manner of someone who has had to work hard to be understood their entire life, and takes the job of teaching a new person seriously. By the end of the hour, Marcus could sign 12 new phrases with reasonable accuracy. He signed carefully, "Thank you. You are a good teacher." Wren looked at his hands. Then she looked at his face. Then she picked up the notebook and wrote, in her small, precise handwriting, "You're the first grown-up who tried this hard." Marcus read those words and had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Meanwhile, the investigation was moving. Detective Faust called Marcus twice that first week with updates that he delivered in the clipped, careful language of someone choosing each word for legal precision. Dorothy Marsh had regained consciousness in the Pittsburgh hospital. She was cooperating with investigators. The man in the gray jacket had been identified as a man named Carl Briggs, with 2 prior arrests for child trafficking-related offenses, both of which had resulted in charges being dropped before trial. Marcus relayed none of this to Wren. She was a child. She deserved to have a week that wasn't about what had been done to her. She deserved a week of grilled cheese and rocket drawings and an awkward man practicing hand signs at the kitchen table. But there was a piece of information that Faust delivered on the Thursday of that first week that Marcus could not simply fold away and ignore. "We've been going through the placement records," Faust said. "All 4 of Wren's placements over the past 3 years. We're finding irregularities in 3 of them. Unofficial payments. Off-book transfers." Marcus was standing on the back porch, voice low. "Meaning someone was selling placement slots. Meaning someone was moving this specific child deliberately. Keeping her in placements that could be disrupted quickly, that wouldn't attach too strongly, that wouldn't ask too many questions." The cold weight settled in Marcus's stomach again. "Why Wren specifically?" "That," Faust said, "is what we're still working on. But Mr. Cole, I want you to be aware, the people we're looking at are not small time. This is organized. And we don't yet know how many people are involved or how far up it goes. Are we safe?" Marcus asked, and he meant Wren, and Eli, and the quiet house on Chestnut Street with the overcrowded coat rack. "We have no reason to believe you're in direct danger," Faust said. "But I'd ask you to be alert. Lock your doors. Call me immediately if anything feels off." Marcus locked his doors that night, and lay awake until 2 in the morning listening to the sounds of his house. Down the hall, Wren was sleeping. He could see the light under her door, because she slept with the lamp on, something she had communicated on the first night by pointing at the switch and shaking her head. He hadn't asked why. He simply left the lamp on. Some things didn't need explaining. On Saturday of that first week, Marcus signed Eli up for ASL classes at the Millhaven Community Center. Then, on impulse, he signed himself up too, the adult beginner class, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. When he told Wren, she looked at the written note for a long moment. Then she wrote underneath it, "You don't have to do that." He took the pen and wrote back, "I know." She read it. She looked up at him. She looked back down at the paper. She wrote one more word, small and careful, the letters slightly uneven, as though the weight of the feeling behind them made her hand unsteady. "Why?" Marcus took the pen. He wrote, "Because you deserve to be understood. Not just sometimes. All the time." Wren stared at those words for a very long time. Then she folded the paper and put it in her pocket. That afternoon, Marcus was in the garage looking for Eli's bicycle pump when his phone rang. It was Sylvia Park, the social worker, and the tone of her voice when he answered was different from the careful professional cadence he'd heard all week. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. There's something you need to know about Wren's file. Something that was flagged this morning that changes some things." "What kind of things?" Marcus asked. Sylvia was quiet for a beat too long. "The kind that are going to be hard to hear," she said. "But the kind that I think you need to know." Marcus stood in his garage with the late November cold coming under the door, and he said, "Tell me." And what Sylvia told him next stopped his heart entirely. What Sylvia told him was this: Wren Calloway was not an orphan. She had a father. His name was listed in the sealed portion of her case file, a section that had been flagged as restricted 3 years ago by a notation that cited safety concerns for the biological parent. The father had not surrendered his parental rights voluntarily. According to the file, he had been told, 3 years ago, that Wren had been placed with relatives following his hospitalization for a work injury, and that the placement was stable and permanent. He had been told not to attempt contact, that contact would be disruptive to her adjustment. He had been told this by a caseworker who, it now appeared, was one of the names appearing in Detective Faust's investigation. He had believed them. And he had spent 3 years trying to heal from an injury that had left him partially disabled, working through the system to demonstrate his fitness as a parent, applying through proper channels to reinstate contact, being denied at every step by a wall of bureaucratic obstruction that, in retrospect, was not bureaucratic incompetence but deliberate interference. His name was Daniel Calloway. He was 34 years old. He lived in Stanton, Pennsylvania, which was 43 miles from Millhaven. He was deaf. Wren's deafness was inherited. Her father had been deaf since birth. Marcus sat in Sylvia's office and read through the file summary she was permitted to share with him, and felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought he understood about this situation. "He's been looking for her," Sylvia said quietly. 3 years. He hired a private investigator 8 months ago. The PI is the one who found the irregularities in the placement records and reported them to the State Oversight Board, which is partly what triggered this investigation. The report was filed 6 weeks ago. And now here we are. Marcus looked up. "Does Wren know she has a father?" Sylvia folded her hands on her desk. "We don't know what she was told. What we do know is that her case file lists her status as parental rights terminated, voluntary, which is, based on what we're finding, almost certainly fraudulent." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Outside Sylvia's window, the November sky was the flat gray of cold concrete. "What happens now?" he asked. "There will need to be a verification process. Documentation review, legal proceedings to address the fraudulent termination. It won't be fast. And during that process, Wren remains in your placement, because disrupting her again right now would be genuinely harmful." Sylvia looked at him directly. "Mr. Cole, I'm telling you this because you have a right to know what you're in the middle of. And because I need to ask you directly, how are you with this?" Marcus thought about Eli, drawing rocket ships at the kitchen table. He thought about Wren, teaching him sign language with patient, exasperated precision. He thought about the paper she had folded and put in her pocket. "I got involved in this because a child needed help," he said finally. "That's still true. Whatever form the help needs to take." Telling Wren was the hardest thing Marcus had done since telling a 7-year-old Eli that his mother wasn't coming home. He sat with her at the kitchen table that evening, Eli at a friend's house, the house very quiet. He wrote it out carefully, clearly, revised it twice, and then slid the paper across to her. "There is something important I need to tell you. It's about your father. He is alive. He has been looking for you for 3 years. He never stopped looking." Wren read the paper. She read it again. She set it down. She picked it up and read it a third time. Then she looked up at Marcus and signed, slowly enough that he caught every word, "He left me." Marcus shook his head. "He wrote, he was told you were safe and being cared for. He was lied to. The same people who kept moving you kept him away from you. He never chose to leave." Wren stared at the paper for a very long time. Her face was doing something complicated and private, the way faces do when something enormous is happening underneath them. She picked up the pen. She wrote, "How do you know he's telling the truth?" Marcus wrote, "I don't know him. I can't promise you anything about him. But I know that sometimes people who love you are kept away from you by people who should have protected you and didn't. And I think you deserve to find out the truth yourself." Wren set down the pen. She pressed both hands flat on the table, a gesture Marcus had learned meant she was thinking hard and needed a moment. He waited. Then she wrote, "Will you be there?" "Every step," Marcus wrote back. The meeting between Wren and Daniel Calloway took place 3 weeks later, in a neutral room at the Child Advocacy Center, with Sylvia present, and a certified ASL interpreter, and Marcus, who sat in the corner with his hands clasped and his heart in his throat. Daniel Calloway was a lean man with dark hair going gray at the temples and Wren's exact eyes, the shape, the depth, the particular dark brown that caught the light a certain way. He walked with a slight stiffness from his injury but held himself straight. He sat across the table from his daughter, and the look on his face was the most complicated thing Marcus had ever seen on a human face, joy and grief and guilt and hope and 3 years of desperate longing all at once. He signed to her. The interpreter voiced it. "I looked for you every day. I never stopped. I am so sorry it took this long." Wren looked at her father for a long time. Her hands were still in her lap. Marcus watched her face and did not breathe. Then, slowly, she signed back. 2 words. The interpreter's voice broke slightly on them. "I know. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't reunion, not in any clean or easy sense. It was a beginning. The first word of a very long conversation that would take months and patience and honesty and probably tears and probably joy, the messy, genuine, nonlinear work of 2 people finding each other after being deliberately kept apart. But it was a beginning. Carl Briggs was arrested 6 weeks after Marcus found Wren in the parking lot. The case expanded significantly. Investigators identified a network that had exploited vulnerabilities in the foster care placement system in 3 counties, moving children in ways that maximized financial gain and minimized oversight. Dorothy Marsh cooperated fully and received a reduced sentence. 3 social workers were charged. A county administrator resigned before charges were formally filed and was subsequently arrested. The fraudulent termination of Daniel Calloway's parental rights was formally vacated by a family court judge 4 months after Wren came to stay on Chestnut Street. It was not a simple process. Nothing about the healing was simple. Wren spent those 4 months in Marcus's home, growing slowly, carefully, into something that resembled ease. She and Eli became, in the organic and unpredictable way of children thrown together by circumstance, genuinely close, communicating in the hybrid language of siblings, part sign, part gesture, part shared look, part the comfortable shorthand of 2 people who have decided to understand each other. Eli's ASL improved dramatically. He announced at school that he was going to be an interpreter when he grew up, then announced he was going to be an astronaut, then announced he was going to be an astronaut who was also an interpreter. Marcus's ASL improved too, class by class, week by week, until the evening when Ren corrected him on a sign and he argued back in sign language and she stared at him for a full 3 seconds before signing, with enormous satisfaction, "You're getting better." He signed back, "I had a good teacher." She rolled her eyes in the way she'd inherited from approximately no one and learned entirely on her own, the universal teenage-adjacent eye roll of a child tolerating an adult they actually quite like. He was surprised to find himself laughing. Spring came to Millhaven the way it always did, slowly at first and then all at once, bare branches suddenly confused with green, the cold loosening its grip overnight like a fist finally opening. Ren had been with Marcus and Eli for 5 months when Daniel Calloway came for dinner for the first time. Marcus had prepared too much food, which was his personal stress response, and the table was crowded with dishes. Eli had made a centerpiece out of construction paper rockets, which he explained very seriously was a formal decoration choice and not just something he'd made at school. Daniel arrived with flowers, yellow tulips, and handed them to Ren at the door with a formality that was clearly nerves, which Ren acknowledged by accepting them with equal formality, and then immediately handing them to Marcus to find a vase, which made Daniel exhale with something close to laughter. It was not a smooth evening. It was not a movie reconciliation with a swelling soundtrack. It was two people who were still learning to be around each other, mediated by a man who had no business being in the middle of their story and yet somehow was, and an 8-year-old boy who kept signing things to Daniel at high speed and then looking expectantly for a response, which kept everyone productively occupied and broke the tension at regular intervals. But there was a moment, somewhere in the middle of the meal, when Daniel said something to Ren, signed it, quietly, just between them, and whatever it was made Ren look at her plate for a moment, and then look back at him, and signed something back, and the interpreter wasn't in the room because this wasn't an official meeting, it was just dinner, and Marcus couldn't follow the exchange at his current level of ASL. But he didn't need to. The shape of it was visible from the outside. It was the shape of something real beginning to exist between two people where before there had been only absence. The legal custody arrangement was finalized 3 months later. Ren returned to live with her father, not because Marcus's home was found lacking, but because Daniel Calloway was her father, had always been her father, had fought for 3 years through broken systems and deliberate obstruction to reclaim his daughter, and the right outcome was for them to build their life together. The court, the social workers, and every professional involved was unanimous on this. It was the right outcome. It was also the hardest day Marcus had experienced since Renata died. He drove Ren to Daniel's apartment in Stanton on a Saturday in June. The apartment was small and carefully prepared. Ren's room had been painted the particular shade of blue she'd mentioned once, offhandedly, in a conversation Marcus had not realized Daniel had been told about until he saw the walls. There were framed prints and a bookshelf and a desk with a lamp and colored pencils. Marcus carried in the last box and stood in the hallway for a moment. Ren appeared from her new room and stood in front of him. She looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, and for a moment neither of them did anything. Then Marcus signed, carefully and deliberately, making sure each word was right. "You are brave. You are strong. You are loved. You will always have a place with us." Ren watched his hands. When he finished, she was very still for a moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, fierce and sudden and brief, the way a 10-year-old hugs when they have decided to commit fully to a feeling for exactly 3 seconds before pulling back and composing themselves. She let go. She stepped back. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She signed, "Thank you for stopping." Marcus had to clear his throat before he could sign back, "Thank you for trusting me." Daniel walked Marcus to his van. The two men stood in the parking lot for a moment, the June afternoon warm around them. "I don't know how to thank you," Daniel said. He spoke aloud as well as signing, his voice carrying the particular quality of someone who has learned to speak alongside signing, for the benefit of hearing people. "There are no words. She did most of it herself," Marcus said honestly. "I just didn't drive away." Daniel looked at him. "That's everything," he said. That's the whole thing, right there. They shook hands. It felt inadequate and also completely sufficient. On the drive back to Millhaven, Marcus stopped at a gas station 15 minutes outside of Stanton, sat in his van in the parking lot, and allowed himself 10 minutes of feeling the full weight of the past 5 months. The fear, the exhaustion, the love, the grief of a letting go that was right and correct and still hurt, the way right and correct things often do. Then he drove home. Eli was at James's house. The Chestnut Street house was very quiet when Marcus got back. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, looked at the refrigerator with its double layer of drawings, Eli's rockets on top and on the bottom, 3 pictures that Wren had made during her time there, careful, detailed drawings done in colored pencil, landscapes and figures, and 1 drawing of 4 people sitting at a kitchen table that was both technically accomplished and clearly made with feeling. She'd left them behind on purpose. He was certain of it. He made coffee and sat at the table and looked at her drawings for a long time. The first Sunday of every month, Daniel and Wren drove to Millhaven. Eli and Wren had declared this non-negotiable via a jointly authored and signed document that they presented to Marcus and Daniel with great ceremony, which both men signed without reading closely because the expressions on the children's faces left no room for negotiation. They cooked elaborate meals. Daniel and Marcus, it turned out, were both terrible at cooking fish and exceptional at grilling, which led to a summer of outdoor dinners in Marcus's backyard. Eli continued to improve his ASL. Daniel taught him signs that Marcus didn't know yet. Then they both watched Marcus's face when he encountered the gaps in his vocabulary, which was apparently very entertaining. Wren, in the 2nd month after her return to her father, began to do something she hadn't done in years. She began to laugh easily. Not the careful, controlled expressions of someone rationing joy because it might be taken away, but freely, openly, the unguarded laughter of a child who has decided it is safe to be happy. The first time Marcus heard it, really heard it, because Wren's laugh wasn't silent, it was a sound, bright and genuine. He had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to check on something on the grill. Daniel appeared beside him. Looked at the grill. Looked at Marcus. She didn't laugh like that for a long time, he said. I know, Marcus said. You gave that back to her. Marcus shook his head. She always had it. She just needed to feel safe enough to use it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Whatever you need, Marcus. Anything. For the rest of my life. You call me. Marcus looked at him. Same. 2 years after a cold Tuesday morning in November, Marcus Cole was teaching a Tuesday evening ASL class at the Millhaven Community Center, a beginner class, the same one he had sat in as a student. He had been recruited by the instructor, who had noticed his commitment and his natural ease with first-time learners, the particular patience of someone who remembers exactly what it was like to know nothing and to decide it mattered enough to try anyway. He was in the middle of demonstrating a phrase when his phone, set to vibrate on the table, buzzed. He glanced at it. A text from an unknown number in Stanton. He finished the phrase, apologized to the class, and looked at the full message. It was a photo. Wren and Daniel, standing outside what appeared to be a building with a sign above the door. Below the photo, a message, first day of the new program. Deaf Youth Arts Workshop. Her idea. She's teaching it. Wren was 12 now. In the photo she was standing straight, chin up, entirely herself, looking at the camera with those enormous dark eyes that held, unmistakably, the expression of someone who has found their footing in the world. Marcus showed the photo to his class, because he couldn't help it. He explained briefly, in under a minute, what it meant. The class, 12 strangers who had come to learn to communicate across a silence, looked at the photo and understood without needing it explained further. One of them started to applaud. The rest joined in. Marcus looked at the photo one more time. He thought about a parking lot in November. About a girl with uneven pigtails and a notebook and a broken shoe buckle who had decided, with all the desperate courage she had left, to trust a stranger. He thought about how the right story almost didn't happen. About all the versions of that morning where he kept walking to his van. Where he didn't turn around. where convenience defeated conscience by a margin of 3 seconds. He thought about what Eli had said, aged 7, on the night Marcus came home from the police station, and told him about a deaf girl named Wren. "You're going to help her, right, Dad? Because that's what we do. That's what we do." He put his phone back on the table and returned to his class. Outside the community center window, the November night was cold and clear, and Millhaven went quietly about its business, full of ordinary people making small daily choices between looking away and staying, between convenience and conscience, between the life that asks nothing of you and the life that asks everything and gives back more than you could have imagined. Marcus Cole had pulled over on a Tuesday morning. That was all. That was everything.